For decades, the United States and Iran have been stuck in this really tense standoff. But if you look past the daily headlines, you'll find these moments of direct, actual military confrontation. So we're going to look at 4 specific clashes that show a really interesting pattern, one that kind of explains the tensions we're still seeing today.
Let's start on January 8th, 2020. Iran launches a whole barrage of ballistic missiles at a U.S. airbase in Iraq. The very first official word from the White House, it was calm, it was measured. The quote was, "All is well." But was it really?
Yeah, the reality on the ground told a completely different story. I mean, satellite images and videos from soldiers showed absolute devastation. Hangars, barracks, just obliterated. And while, thankfully, no soldiers were killed, over 100 of them were later diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries, just from the sheer force of the blasts. This was a long way from all is well. So what on earth led to this moment? Well, that brings us to our first confrontation, the missile retaliation of 2020. This was a direct, very public act of revenge. The fuse was actually lit just 5 days earlier. On January 3rd, a U.S. drone strike killed one of Iran's most powerful military leaders, General Qasem Soleimani, right at Baghdad's airport. Iran promised there'd be a response, and on January 8th, they made good on that promise, launching dozens of ballistic missiles right at that U.S.-operated airbase. And what's really fascinating here is how Iran framed this. They didn't hide it, they immediately claimed responsibility. They called it a deliberate warning. They made it super clear that they had targeted infrastructure, fuel depots, aircraft hangars, while specifically avoiding the barracks where soldiers slept. The message was unmistakable. We can hit you anywhere, anytime. But we chose not to cause mass casualties this time. But that 2020 missile strike, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. Let's rewind the clock just 1 year to another really high-stakes incident, this time playing out in the skies over the Persian Gulf. Okay, so this involved a U.S. RQ-4 Global Hawk, which is one of the most advanced surveillance drones in the entire world. It was flying at an incredible 60,000 feet. Now, at that altitude, it should have been safe from most air defense systems. Or so the U.S. thought. Using a pretty sophisticated surface-to-air missile system, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps locked on and fired. And boom, the drone was gone. Immediately, you get these 2 completely conflicting stories. Iran said the drone had violated its airspace, while the U.S. was adamant it was over international waters. And here's the crucial part. This came so close to blowing up into something much bigger. The U.S. actually had retaliatory airstrikes all planned out, ready to go. But literally at the last possible minute, the order was called back. War was avoided, but man, what an incredibly close call. All right, for our third incident, we've got to go back even further, all the way to the height of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. This whole period became known as the Tanker War, and it really set the stage for some direct naval confrontations. So during the war, Iran started attacking Kuwaiti oil tankers to mess with the global oil supply. In response, the U.S. kicked off something called Operation Earnest Will. The mission was pretty simple: have U.S. warships escort and protect these tankers through the really dangerous waters of the Persian Gulf. This was a massive undertaking, the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. The U.S. also came up with this really clever strategy they called reflagging. So check this out. Step 1, Iran is hitting Kuwaiti tankers. So for step 2, the U.S. lets those same tankers fly the American flag. The logic for step 3 was simple, but incredibly bold. Now, an attack on that ship is a direct attack on the United States itself. Well, Iran decided to test that resolve. On October 16, 1987, they fired a Chinese-made Silkworm missile. And it didn't hit a U.S. warship, it hit the MV Isle City, one of those very same reflagged Kuwaiti tankers now sailing under American protection. The missile slammed right into the ship's bridge. 18 crew members were injured, and the ship's American captain was tragically blinded in the attack. So Iran had directly challenged the U.S. flag, and America hit back by destroying 2 Iranian oil platforms out in the Gulf. Our fourth and final confrontation happens just a year later, in 1988. And this one is a perfect, and I mean perfect, illustration of asymmetric warfare. That's where a really low-tech, cheap weapon can cause massive damage to a high-tech, super expensive adversary. As part of all this, Iran started putting a network of simple, anchored naval mines all over the Persian Gulf.
Now, these weren't just floating on the surface where you could easily spot them. No, they were changed so they would float about 5 meters below the surface, perfectly positioned to hit the hull of a big ship passing right over them. And on April 14, 1988, the guided missile frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts sailed directly over one of those hidden mines. The explosion was catastrophic. It ripped a 21-foot hole in its hull, it flooded the engine room, and it nearly sank the entire warship. 10 sailors had to be medically evacuated. It took an absolutely heroic effort just to keep that ship from going under. And here it is. This is the core of the story. The estimated cost of that Iranian mine that caused all that chaos and destruction? Just $500. And the value of the U.S. warship it nearly sank? $90 million. A $500 weapon crippled a $90 million piece of military hardware. That is asymmetric warfare in a single devastating picture. So, when we put all 4 of these events together, from missile strikes to drones to naval mines, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. It's this decades-long history of direct challenges, calculated responses, and escalations that always seem to stop just short of all-out war. Let's just put it all together here. As you can see, the weapons change, from high-tech ballistic missiles all the way down to simple, cheap contact mines. The targets change too, from air bases to warships. But the pattern is so consistent. Iran uses a whole range of tactics, often asymmetric ones, to challenge U.S. assets. And the U.S. responds, creating this cycle of confrontation that has really defined their relationship for decades. This history basically reveals a dangerous playbook that's been written over 40 years of attacks and counterattacks. It shows that both sides seem to have a pretty good idea of just how far they can push before risking a full-blown war. Which leaves all of us with a really critical question. How do these events from the past continue to shape the unwritten and often unspoken rules of engagement between the U.S. and Iran right now, today?